Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and reject that digital ID, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is one of those things that I kind of saw the other day. Do not introduce digital ID cards. You know, this thing has sort of started up. It needed a goal of 100,000. 1.2 million British people said that they don't want to see digital IDs coming into their country. That number just keeps growing. So I wanted to kind of touch this situation a little bit. The reason why we're talking about this is I've covered a lot of stuff recently on internet censorship, government surveillance, user privacy, a lot of things that I hold near and dear and important to me, right? And I think we live in a world that is slowly turning into, well, I mean, let's be real, not slowly, pretty aggressively turning into a surveillance state. But before we go into this video, I do not want to be the one spreading misinformation or fear-mongering you, okay? I want to just lay out the facts and lay out the reality of a situation. So I do implore that you watch this video. I'm not going to make it too terribly long. I'm just going to give you the upfront facts here. So according to the United Kingdom, in order to work now, in order to go into the future, digital ID is mandatory. And the government says that it's to combat illegal working while making it easier to a vast majority of the people to use the vital government services that they have. Now, I want to start off by saying IDs are pretty much commonplace everywhere, okay? Obviously, in Canada, if you want to have a valid ID, something like a driver's license makes sense. Obviously, it contains my name, my address, date of birth, so on and so forth. And of course, obviously, there are, things that don't serve as valid ID in Canada. For things like health cards, for instance, they don't. So driver's licenses and passports are these IDs that you basically show around the entire world. Okay, so for instance, a cop pulls me over, I show them my identification. But what if you're like, Muta, what if I don't want to carry around my goddamn wallet, okay? The only reason I carry around my wallet is because I need my driver's license when I drive. If I get pulled over, I need to show an ID to the cop. Otherwise, I could be in some pretty serious trouble. So of course, obviously, this is not new. For instance, in the United States, there is also digital ID that is available. For instance, if you want to fly domestically, you can go to the Google Wallet and store ID information for your, participating state, so you don't have to whip out the driver's license when you go to the TSA. For instance, if you're in the state of California, you can use their wallet application, the Apple Wallet, the Google Wallet, to store, yes, your identification, your ID card. So when a chippy pulls you over, instead of showing them your physical license, you can give them a digital license. Actually, before I spread a little misinformation, just to reiterate, this will not replace a driver's license physical yet. Law enforcement, state government agencies, and businesses aren't yet accepting the MDL. So this technology is already here and it works in other countries, okay? Now, why is it such a huge deal and why is it such a massive issue in the United Kingdom? Well, they're kind of billing it as a way for a measure to make it tough to work in their country illegally. Now, I don't know much about the United Kingdom and their illegal immigration, but illegal immigration is a huge hot button issue in the entire world. It's an issue in Canada, it's an issue obviously in the United States, and it's an issue clearly in the UK. And I've seen, all the images of like the boats that are flooding into the country and the metrics that they have that illegals are coming into their country to work and are taking jobs from, again, residents, right? Like actual like citizens in their country, which is a problem. But to give you an idea, this digital ID system doesn't necessarily even solve it. So there are already requirements and systems in place in the United Kingdom to check if a job applicant is right to, can work. And a lot of this works with them validating through their systems online, whether users have valid documentation. And I think the documentation is like a work visa, I think an NI number or something of that nature, which is equivalent to like a SIN number in Canada or an SSN number in the United States. It's one of the, it's literally the ID fucking code you get, when you have any legal status in a country. Now, there are penalties, obviously. If you are an employer that is illegally hiring people that aren't, they don't have a right to work in your country, you could face some pretty huge breaches, something like 45,000 per illegal worker and up to 60,000 if you decide to repeat offense. Now, obviously, I don't think this is a huge issue for like a super large corporation, but typically it's not the big companies that hire most of the illegal workers, right? A lot of the big companies usually have the money and the clout to like pay for work visas or something of that nature, but for a small business, it can be an issue. Now, I personally don't think that requiring somebody to show a license on a smartphone is necessarily going to work if the employer themselves is already breaking the law. Remember, employers hire illegal workers mostly because they can pay them significantly less, and they know full fucking well that they can abuse the worker, and the worker doesn't really have any recourse because what they're doing isn't necessarily legal in the first place. So again, I don't see how having a real license or a digital license is necessarily affecting, the illegal worker economy, okay? The thing is, people who are breaking the law as employers are still going to continue to break the law. Now, some of the things that they do say in their entire page actually does kind of make sense, okay? So to give you an idea, they do say that all of the IDs are stored literally on your device. So it's got the best-in-class security, state-of-the-art encryption that is already protecting millions of transactions daily. So they're kind of using similar like technology to how you use Apple Pay and Google Wallet, which do not store a copy of your actual, credit card. In fact, what they have is a, virtual credit card that is usually communicated and created on the fly with the bank. And all of that information is stored locally on your device. So as far as people saying that there's like a centralized database into this, of course, the majority of your actual information seems to be staying on your device. The digital credentials will be stored directly on your device. And that's according to the government here, so trust them at your own behest. So the new digital ID will be authoritative proof of someone is in this country legally. It'll therefore include name, date of birth, information on nationality or residency status, and a photo. So of course, the other big thing about this, obviously they're trying to combat some form of ID spoofing in a way too, because obviously people come in with fake credentials, people come in with overstayed like credentials at times, and I guess having a digital system makes it so that if you want to immediately reject something, it will immediately be reflected on the mobile app. So no trying to pull the wool over any government eyes when they can clearly and very quickly rapidly see if something is expired or invalidated, which is kind of important, and it's kind of a good point to be bringing up. Now, obviously, the people have not been taking too kindly to this. That petition is increasing pretty fucking rapidly, of course, as you can see. So what are some of the actual things that people have brought up, and where is there some level of misinfo? So, for instance, if you go into My Dog Muppet here, who posted, resident registration was used in Weimar, Germany, post-1900. It was brought in 1938. Jews were forced to carry identity cards stamped with a J and to adopt the names Sarah or Israel as middle names. Passports were also marked for Jews and other deemed undesirables. Drafting men into the Wehrmacht, locating asocials, Roma, political opponents, and especially Jews for deportation, implementing racial laws like the Nuremberg laws, which require tracing ancestry via vital records. So perhaps Starmer, who is the PM of the UK, is a closet admirer of all things Nazi. Now again, digital ID by itself isn't necessarily equating anybody to the Third Reich. But I think the idea here is that, listen, they're introducing this thing as a way to say we're fighting against illegal workers, which I don't know the efficacy of this. It would be a lot better if the government said we're using this to fight people who are faking ID cards and passports and credentials that are used to abuse the country. That would probably make more sense. I don't know who the fucking PR teams for the UK government are, but they always stick their feet in fucking bear traps. Now, for some people, it's actually a pretty good thing and it's more convenient. And this user brings up a pretty interesting point. Driving licenses aren't a full ID as it doesn't prove residence, nor whether you can work or not, which is true. Actually, many people in Canada can, for instance, get a driver's license. Now, obviously, this has your address, so it should technically prove my, address, unless a UK license is substantially different. But nowhere on this actual license does it say that I'm a citizen or an immigrant or a permanent resident. And a lot of those different connotations can affect your work status in the country. So again, to go further into it, a passport is physical. I mean, it could be digital, and it doesn't have tracked use checked against central databases, except at the border. It's only for citizens. The ID doesn't have to be. It could be held by ILR or Visa, and it doesn't reflect anything like your benefit situations. Example, when LA needs to do a means test. So again, this is all UK-oriented stuff. So for the UK guys, you probably understand it. For the rest of the world, these are all just random, words for me. Or your eligibility for NHS treatment. I know what the NHS is. Passports are also static. They have a set amount of info that's printed and can stay that way for years to decades. An ID is updated with eligibility and changes to your status. And that's pretty important, right? When you get a passport, for me, my passport was made like last year. So for the next 9 years, it's probably going to stay exactly the fucking same. My ID, however, requires me to at least have this constantly renewed. For instance, this expires in 2030, so wow, that's actually a pretty big expiration date, Jesus Christ. But yeah, this is something that I'll constantly have to be getting updated. But a digital ID can be updated even faster. It can be, the changes can be reflected. So I guess if the idea is you want to have, a more accurate representation of what that person is in the country at the time, digital ID, I guess, is the way to go, because anyone in the government can update it to, to what they want reflected. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of individuals, okay? Tom Warren from the War Verge was like, no thanks, checkpoint Britain, the dangers of digital ID and why privacy must be protected. So here they use the prime minister themselves. They brought up their immigration status, right to work, right to rent, and of course the expiry. So, this seems almost big brothery, right? Could the government control, where the fuck you wanted to work, if you could work, if you could rent? The thing about it is that a lot of times this already does exist. So this is why I wanted to kind of cut the fear-mongering stuff a little bit. For a lot of people that brought up these image macros. So this one right here says, it's the loss of privacy. Every move, purchase, or interaction could be logged or monitored. And this is not something that is, impossible to do. Right now, if the government of Canada wanted to know what the fuck I was buying, okay, they could go and subpoena my bank information. I'm pretty sure the cops can do that. I'm pretty sure the CRA could do that. I'm pretty sure any federal agency in Canada, if they really wanted to and had a sufficient enough reason, could pull that out, right? But of course, it kind of makes it a little bit easier if, again, the concept of a digital ID being pinged is something that the government can pull up a lot quicker than warrants going to banks. But we'll get to that towards the end of the video. Centralized control. Whoever runs the system holds enormous power over your daily life. And that could be true, right? Like if the government can now decide on that ID card, hey, you're allowed to work, you're allowed to rent, you're allowed to do whatever it is, right? And they can change that at any moment. Yeah, if it's used nefariously, sure, it could affect somebody poor. And you might be like, but Muda, would the government really do that? The thing is, do you trust the government to be 100% fair with a system like this? For me, I really do have the best intentions, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there with very valid reasons as to why they wouldn't want the government or any of these tech agencies to be deciding what the system, has on you or not. Data breaches. Huge databases are irresistible targets for hackers risking your identity. And the thing is, a data breach can still affect you even if digital ID doesn't exist. There's a lot of places, there's a lot of stuff you've probably heard where social insurance numbers have been leaked. Hell, these people could hack an internet service provider or any of these like tech companies and dig out people's personal information, which usually could contain things like addresses, emails, and whatnot. So you don't necessarily need this, government ID system to be hacked. However, it does raise the question, if tech companies that are already, fighting against this kind of stuff, cybersecurity-wise, are having a tough time in today's day and age, I don't really trust any fucking government to be able to protect my shit. So then, exclusion. No ID, no access, people could be locked out of work, healthcare, travel, or even shopping. And the thing is, this is not digital ID exclusive. I want you to remember, this is something that easily could have happened and still does happen with traditional IDs. For instance, if you don't have an ID, if you don't have a health card, right, you may not be, privy to certain services in my province. If you don't have IDs, you may not be privy to certain things. Having a digital or physical ID doesn't necessarily, a digital ID doesn't necessarily mean you'll be excluded. You already can be excluded. Now, of course, you've also got freedom erosion. Once this becomes required, reversing it will be almost impossible. And I guess that's kind of true for any form of ID. I sincerely doubt back in the day, we used to have horse and buggy licenses, right? But obviously, as cars were introduced, driver's licenses were brought in, and it was something that, immediately, it was something that came in, took a little bit to, for people to get used to, but eventually it just became the norm. And digital ID, I don't doubt, is going to end up becoming the norm, because the reason I'm talking about it is I might not be a United Kingdom guy, but I can tell you right now, for a country like Canada, for a country like the United States, for a lot of places, this is going to be the future. If digital ID is something that kind of fucking scares you, remember, I was actually at the LAX a few days ago, and at the LAX, what was so wild was that for, I guess, domestic people traveling, they have to have like US biometrics, like something about like real Face ID or some shit like that, where again, all these digital systems are being implemented. Now, a lot of people have brought up digital surveillance as a thing. And one of the things that got brought up with the United Kingdom was, according to some of the guys over at Hacker News, when you look at things like what the UK is already doing with things like the Online Safety Act, which again is not really going all that well. In fact, it's really funny that the Australian version, literally yesterday, everyone was laughing at them because they started targeting places like GitHub. So kids are unsafe from a code writing platform because I guess it could be used as a social media service. It really feels like most of the internet is being locked down, especially places that don't fucking need to be, okay? All because we wanted to protect children from, adult movies, which is noble, but we can see the effect of what happens when governments introduce a law that ultimately affects far more than it ever actually should have. You also got situations like the Snoopers Charter, which, again, I have to verify this myself, but ISPs can keep records on you, which is actually true for most of these Five Eyes countries. Canada does this. The United States does this. I would be surprised of a country that doesn't necessarily do this. So, of course, you've also got, the UK and, of course, the EU requiring encryption backdoors, things like chat controls. This is a set of countries that wants to get rid of encryption. They want to get rid of any form of online privacy. So all of this being said, when you look at the relationship that the government has with organizations like Palantir, for instance, where I believe, at least for the UK, they ended up getting like over $1 billion worth of contracts when it came to defenses. So all of these things combined, look, the future of the internet and the future of the world is headed towards this digital state, right? And one of the things that really gets me on a surveillance level is this. So I want you to ride this scenario with me really quickly. Let's say in the future, right? You want to go you want to go onto like, a social media site, right? You want to go to Reddit and voice your concerns on the government or really anything. Now, to access Reddit, you need to build an account, and in the UK, you need to provide an identification for said account. Now, right now, there's a way to bypass that. If you live in the United Kingdom, you can get VPNs like Mullvad. And the reason I bring up Mullvad is that you really don't need to identify yourself to purchase from them. If you have cryptocurrency, or if you're just mailing cash to them, you literally can build a Mullvad account without any identifying characteristics and get access to a pretty solid VPN. You can then use Mullvad to connect to countries that currently do not require you to provide identification. So a lot of the UK people, overnight, when the OSA was launched, they were like, oh, fuck, let's get a VPN and move on through there. So they were bypassing the state surveillance apparatus right there. But let's imagine down the world, right? Like, let's imagine by 2030, by 2035, 2040 even, let's say it takes that long. Most of the countries in the world now require you to use any form of internet access. They require you to use digital ID. So Canada requires you to use it. The United States federally requires you to use it. Fucking France does, every large country. And what happens is, even if you start VPNing to countries that you once thought were safe, you now need to provide IDs. But not just IDs, you now need to provide IDs for that country. So the whole VPN shit just goes out and bust. Now you have to go back to the UK and provide your ID to access Reddit or any of these websites. Now, the reason why this hits me on a surveillance level is that, the anonymity that we once had, in our day-to-day life, that privacy, that, just tiny bit we could use to fight government surveillance, that gets taken away. Because now, in order to access most of these sites where you talk about your social media stuff, or you discuss things with, or you air your grievances, they will all require you to use IDs, or they just won't be servicing your country. So now, if the government ever wants to look into that database or just subpoena which, sites pinged that ID number, that digital ID, they now have an entire idea of you accessing certain websites. Before, it could be kind of run in a situation where you can go to like a public Wi-Fi, access the internet through like an anonymized like system and generally be okay. But now, because your ID is so tied to you as a person and how you interact on the internet, this is a way for, in my opinion at least, I think it's mostly a pathway for government surveillance. I don't really think the government gives a shit about like, stopping the illegal immigrants from like working in the country. There are already systems in place to do that. I don't think employers, who are illegally hiring people are going to fucking give a shit about this. But that's just where my mind comes into, okay? And the reason I'm talking about it is because, dude, down the road, it's not far-fetched to think this can't happen to me in Canada, okay? Or the United States when I choose to go down there, okay? My kids in the future who are Americans, they'll have to deal with this shit if, God forbid, their states or federally this passes. It's one of the reasons why, people are like, man, you're a Canadian. Why are you so worried about this shit? Because I know the writing on the wall, okay? I know the fucking future. You don't have to be Nostradamus to see if it works in one of the biggest countries in the world that it can't eventually be passed down. And all the time, these politicians will always use bullshit reasoning to make this stuff pass. When in reality, they don't care about any of this stuff. This is just a way for them to fit more surveillance into your life. And it's one of the reasons why I'm not for digital IDs. I don't think that there's enough of a positive benefit that you get out of this technology right now, and maybe even in the fucking future, even comparing itself to like traditional physical identification cards. But, and then again, comment section is rife for debate on this. Let me know what you think. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.